Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Tuesday the 28th of September and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson and today I'm hosting the programme from Edinburgh while our studios in Cowcaddens are upgraded. First we will have a look at today's coronavirus updates, then I will introduce this evening's guest, and then we will look at the stories behind today's headlines together. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 3,160,909 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 2,600,575 have been confirmed negative and 560,334 have tested positive. There are 2,370 new cases of COVID confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. And I'm sorry to say that there are 16 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by coronavirus now stands at 8,551. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test in the past 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,027 were in hospital last night, 73 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,184,574 people had received their first dose of the COVID vaccination, and 3,832,498 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 136,375 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, and that's an increase of 167 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. We also have an update from the Office for National Statistics this evening. The number of deaths from all causes in the UK in the week ending the 17th of September 2021 was 12,640, and that is 19.3% above the average for the corresponding week between 2015 and 2019. Deaths were above the 5-year average in England, Scotland, Wales, and in Northern Ireland. Of these, 1,049 deaths were registered involving coronavirus, accounting for 1 in 12 deaths, that's just over 8%. The number of deaths from COVID-19 was the highest since the week ending the 12th of March 2021. Northern Ireland has the highest proportion of deaths involving COVID-19 at 16.8%, followed by Scotland at 10.7%, Wales at 9.9%, and England at 7.6%. Now, we're lucky enough to be joined this evening by an elected politician who's becoming a regular contributor to our programmes, Paul McLennan MSP. Paul has been the councillor from Dunbar for many years and is now also the SNP MSP for East Lothian. Paul, good evening. How are you doing?
Evening, Andrew. Not bad, not bad. Been an interesting day in the chamber, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on. But yeah, good, thanks.
Yes, it has, and it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening on Scotland at 7.
No problem.
And our first story this evening is that the Social Justice Secretary, Shona Robeson, has made a heartfelt plea for the UK government to scrap the senseless and harmful withdrawal of the £20 a week universal credit uplift. In the debate in the Scottish Parliament today, Ms Robeson condemned the UK government's proposed removal of the lifeline payment from October the 6th. Over 6 million people across the UK are set to lose more than £1,000 a year, and it is estimated that the cut risks pushing 60,000 people across Scotland, including 20,000 children, into poverty and tens of thousands more into hardship. The Scottish Government has written to the UK Government on 8 occasions throughout the pandemic, asking for them to make the uplift permanent and to extend it to legacy benefits. Following the debate, the Scottish Parliament has voted overwhelmingly to oppose the £20 universal credit cut. The Scottish Conservatives' amendment to the Scottish Government motion argued that now was the right time to make the cut. However, the Scottish Greens Social Security spokesperson Maggie Chapman said the Tories have shown their true colours today, arguing to inflict one of the biggest social security cuts ever made in British history at a time when so many people are struggling with the impact of the pandemic and their ideological Brexit. Commenting on the vote, the SNP MSP Elena Whittam said, "A strong message has been sent to the Tories at Westminster that the Scottish Parliament rejects its plans to cut universal credit from the poorest at a time when they need it the most. Scottish Tory MSPs have let down thousands of their constituents by supporting this callous cut to support and by propping up a Tory government that imposes these policies on the people of Scotland. We cannot trust the Tories to protect the future of the people of Scotland. We need the full powers of independence to build a social security system built for the people of Scotland, not against them." So, Paul, you were in Parliament today for the debate. What struck you most?
I think what struck me most, I think Maggie had mentioned, it was everybody against the Tories, and by I mean everybody, I mean politically. All the parties voted against it other than the Tories, but it's not just the political side of things. It's a story for myself today. I think when you looked at the briefings that we normally receive for these kind of debates, we had briefings from obviously child poverty groups. We had briefings from Age Concern as well. You know, there's 105,000 pensioners in Scotland that are affected by this. You know, 105,000. So that's and on top of national insurance cuts that we're seeing, obviously the rise in national insurance and obviously fuel poverty issues that are going to be coming up as well. I think that it kind of struck me just how isolated the Tories were on this one. On top of that, all the social security committees in the UK came out against it, and the 6 former ministers in the UK government also came out against it. So the Tories were isolated on this, and and it was a sheer hypocrisy. One of their arguments today is, for example, is it's a Westminster issue. Scottish Parliament shouldn't be talking about it. But this was the very same Tory party that raised oil and gas in a debate just a few weeks ago, again a reserved matter. So the hypocrisy was shining through on this one, and there was a quite rightly a lot of anger in the debate and frustration from the opposition parties, all the opposition parties in this regard. So and it kind of defines. For me, it kind of defines where the Tories treat the most vulnerable people, and not only in Scotland but in the UK. And I don't think people will forget this.
Absolutely, Paul. Thank you. And at a time when, as we heard, so many people are struggling with the impact of the pandemic and the impact of Brexit, this is perhaps the largest cut in social security in the UK since the 1930s. So why now, Paul?
I think the Tories' argument was, it's almost like we're now towards coming out the end of the pandemic, and they've argued that, and I don't agree with that. I think we've got a difficult winter ahead, and I think we've seen issues that are now coming on top of, say the national insurance hike, the fuel poverty, the mess of Brexit, and obviously this. So that was one of their arguments. I think today, the other big argument they tried to push was that it was time to move on and get people back into work. Now, the biggest issue that the Tories have got in that argument is the vast majority of people who are on universal credit are actually in work. And we had the ridiculous situation last week that Fraser Coffey, one of the UK government ministers, talked around about people just need to work 2 hours and that would make the money up. Now, there's an analysis being done, and obviously because of tapering with national insurance and universal credit, that it would actually take 9 hours of work a week to claim that back. So, but these are people that are on. Most people are either working or can't work for a specific reason. So their argument, falls, in any way you want to look at it. And I think it's more ideological than anything else. The cost has been estimated around about £5 or £6 billion, and we kept on hearing that it's a political choice. Well, the political choice is, you can see what the Tories' ideology is, and is shining all the way through the debate and the discussions. I can't believe that every single Tory on these benches today actually believed in what the party was saying. Privately they've been saying things differently to us. And even in the debate last week, Alexander Stewart, who closed the debate for the Tories today, had said he'd been lobbying the UK government on the matter, but not a word of that today. And I can't believe that the Tories and the Scottish Parliament unanimously support it. They can't, and you can see that in their body language. That's a part very, very clear.
I was going to come on to that with you, and we will do in a moment, Paul. But I was interested to know, is concern regarding this imminent cut, is it starting to appear in your constituency workload? And if it is, what are you hearing from your constituents?
Yeah, very much. I mean, obviously, the matter itself, if we're talking about universal credit, it's reserved to obviously Westminster, so it's more the MP kind of stuff. But we are seeing it come through, and some of the research we've done is it affects 8,000 families in East Lothian. And we've already got areas, when people look at East Lothian, they think it's a relatively prosperous area. And it is, but we've got pockets of deprivation, around about Trinent and Preston Pans, where they're in the top 10% areas of deprivation in Scotland. And we're doing a bit of work on that, but this is going to set back this massively. And it's going to put more families into poverty, not just in regards to children we talked about, but pensioners as well, who will have the choice either they heat or they eat, and that's literally what it's going to come down to. And the Trussell Trust, gave us evidence in that. In the last year, food bank usage has gone up 33%. In the last year, we're going to see that massively increase again. And I'm already seeing that in discussions we're having with our local food bank.
Of course, and it strikes me, just you mentioning there, the towns and villages of Trinent and Preston Pans, all mining villages that were decimated by the Thatcher government, and here they are, get the people in those towns getting a kicking again at the hands and the feet of the Tories. What I think you mentioned also the how you were reading the body language from the Tory MSPs. You've mentioned to us what you're seeing in your constituency workload. What do you think the Tory MSPs will be seeing in their constituency workloads? And do you think that they know that in their heart of hearts that this is a serious and historic mistake?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say this very often, but there was a very good contribution today from Willie Rennie, and Willie Rennie read out the figures for Tory MSPs and the number of people affected in our area. And Douglas Ross, for example, has about 6,500 households that will be affected by this cut. And obviously, he has the ability to vote against it because he's also down at Westminster. And it varied from around about 6,000 to around about 8,000, 9,000. So they're all affected. So, I can't believe for 1 minute that they're not being contacted, the constituents, and the same thing. So, it will impact on them. They will have the same correspondence that we're having. So they know, and it's a political choice that they're making, and to do that. And as I said, the body language today in private discussions we've been having with Tory MSPs, and what you've been hearing is they don't support this. They don't support it, but they're not brave enough to stand up against their compatriots in Westminster who are making this decision. And as I said, when you look at the national insurance hike as well, it's being proposed that disproportionately hits the poorest in society as well. So, and it's one thing after another. And obviously, we talked around about fuel poverty and energy prices as well, which is going to hit the most vulnerable. So, this is really going to be a triple whammy if people. It's going to hit people, and it's just, it's when you see individual cases how it affects people, it really, really brings it home. These are not just numbers we're talking about; these are people's lives we're talking about, and just seeing one or two cases and the way it impacts on people's lives, it's terrible. It really is. It's terrible. It's heartbreaking.
Oh, absolutely. And as you say, that we're very much at the beginning of the winter, and once we're seeing the real evidence of families who are having to decide whether to heat their homes or feed their children, I think once those real stories start to appear, I wouldn't be surprised if we come back to this. But it also crossed my mind. You mentioned the estimates of about £5 to £6 billion for this across the UK, which would suggest to me that that's maybe £500 to £600 million for Scotland. Now, is this £1,000 cut being set up as sorry? And also, you were mentioning the way in which the Tory MSPs were approaching it. Do you think there's a risk that this £1,000 cut is being set up as some sort of trap for the Scottish Government, who are going to come under tremendous pressure to mitigate the effects that you and I have just been talking about? And I should say, by mitigate, I mean pay for. And so they're going to be forced into paying for yet another callous and cruel policy decision from Westminster.
Yeah, I think it is. I think we've seen this in various policy areas, and I think that they do see it as a trap. They actually had the last week they had to put a hypocrisy to bring forward a motion to ask the Scottish Government to double the child payment as quickly as possible, whilst cutting universal credit in the UK. And it's a long list. When you look at the bedroom tax that was brought in, when you look at the two-child cap, the rape clause that was brought in, the abhorrent rape clause that was brought in, these are things, these are all policy choices that the Scottish Government's had to mitigate for. And I think there was a figure of around about over £2 billion now that the Scottish Government spends on mitigating Westminster policies. Money that we could be spending in doubling the Scottish Child Payment and looking at other issues and how we support the most vulnerable in our society. And and I think the hypocrisy about them trying to bring a motion forward about doubling the Scottish Child Payment whilst cutting universal credit is incredible, absolutely incredible. And I think they're playing to their base support, and that's it. And that's become even more. In the 4 or 5 months I've been in the Parliament, that's what they're trying to do, is play to their base support. And I think in this matter they're doing it even more than they have done over the last 4 or 5 months. But I think politically they will suffer because of this.
Well, we will see, Paul, and I'm pretty confident that we will come. That probably you and I, and certainly we, will be talking about this issue as the winter unfolds and as the real impact of this Westminster Government decision starts to bite on people in our communities across Scotland. But we'll move on now to our next story, and that is that higher risk venues covered by the coronavirus vaccine certification scheme will have 2.5 weeks to test and adapt the new scheme in their own premises before the measures are legally enforced. The scheme will come into effect as planned on Friday, October the 1st in Scotland, meaning people will have to show proof of their status to enter some venues and events. But legal enforcement will not come into effect until Monday, October 18th. People attending a range of late-night venues and larger indoor and outdoor live events, such as music festivals or large sporting events, will be required to show staff their COVID status. This will be done via the COVID status app on their mobile device or using the paper certificate. Deputy First Minister John Swinney said, "This is a very limited scheme and we hope this will allow businesses to remain open and prevent any further restrictions as we head into autumn and winter." The 2.5 weeks, effectively a grace period, before legal enforcement applies, will allow businesses to test, adapt and build confidence in their own practical arrangements to comply with the scheme. We know from expert public health analysis that we must do all that we can to stem the rise in cases and reduce the pressure on the NHS. Vaccine certificates have a role to play as part of a wider package of measures. They add a further layer of protection in certain higher risk settings. So, Paul, John Swinney spoke in Parliament today about a further layer of protection in higher risk settings. But I think that there was also discussion of the vaccine passport being an encouragement to folks over the age of 18 to step up their enthusiasm for getting their double jags. Do you think the vaccine certificate will help encourage that cohort to get fully vaccinated now?
Yeah, I do, Andrew. And there's a debate that the Tories are having tomorrow, which I'm speaking in, which is a one sentence motion basically asking the Scottish Government to scrap the passport scheme. But coming back to the point you made, I think there are examples in the world where that has worked. France and Israel, for example, have brought in the passport scheme and seen big rises in the more younger age groups taking up the scheme itself and taking up the vaccine. And I think the first weekend when it was mentioned, that there was a 50% increase compared to the previous weekend about the younger age group taking that up. And I'm sure that we've seen examples, as I said, in France and Israel, across Europe, where that does encourage people to take up the vaccine. And I think that's one of the main things. Obviously, the other key thing, this is around about trying to ensure that we keep business open over the course of the winter. Nobody knows where COVID's going to go in the winter period. We need to make sure we've got the balance of public safety in mind with keeping business open. This, I think, is a proportionate way of keeping business open in Scotland to make sure that they can trade as normally as they possibly can, whilst public health safety is also paramount as well. So I think it is proportionate. And the key thing that I think the Deputy First Minister mentioned as well, it's going to be reviewed regularly, probably every 2 or 3 weeks. So, if we continue to make progress, nobody wants this in longer than it has to be. And I think that's the key thing. And as you said in your introduction to the article, this is around about a suite of measures that are out there. And I think the Tories are being, again, I think this is playing grandstanding to the base support, and it's not coming across, I think, as being responsible at all.
Absolutely. Now, if you're preparing for the debate tomorrow, you'll know better than me, but I think it was something like 2 million young people in France registered for their vaccinations the day after vaccine
Yeah.
certificates were announced, vaccine passports were announced in France, or it was something like that. So I absolutely get your point. I was also going to ask you a more general question in connection with enforcement. We saw, I think, police enforcement generally in Scotland of COVID restrictions being relatively light touch. House parties were broken up and high profile tourists who shouldn't have been touring were spoken to. But I don't think we saw police turning people around at the border or being particularly assertive in city centres. So do you think that that style of careful policing has been a success? And do you expect that that style of policing will be the approach that's taken once enforcement of the vaccine passports begins?
Yeah, I do, and I think still. I think you mentioned obviously I was still a councillor in East Lothian, and obviously we had quite a bit of interaction with the environmental health departments, who obviously played a key part in some of the guidelines that were brought in, and the police again were used a common sense approach, as did the local authorities in that regard, and speaking to premises and discussing with them what was required. And I don't see a change to that approach. And I think one of the key things that came out the debate today was when the scheme was proposed in principle, we heard the Tories saying that the Scottish Government wasn't talking to business. And they were at that time, and they were now. And they've obviously listened to business and listened to what they've said. So, so the Tories can't have it both ways, that we're not talking to business, and when we do, they criticise us for listening to what they're saying. We're in a pandemic. These things are happening, and we have to be proactive when things come along, and it does. Again, these things can change very quickly. And thankfully, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen the numbers of cases drop. There's still too many, but it's heading in the right way. And we need to make sure that that continues. And we're moving out the summertime where people are going to be more indoors than they are outdoors. So we have to be careful in how we police that, and environment and health agencies within the councils as well have to do that. But I think it'll be policed as it has been over the last number of months. It'll be a sensible approach. And the key thing to remember is this is working and operating in most European countries. And one prime example. I mean, I know football grounds have been talked about. When Denmark played Scotland, it's exactly the scheme had across there and used it, and it works, and it works very efficiently. And I know, I think the football authorities had concerns at the start of this. They've now come out and supported the scheme. So I think now people are recognising with the discussions they've been having that this scheme operates. It can operate. It doesn't. It stop business working as best as it possibly can, and it strikes that balance, as I said, between public health, safety, and making sure that businesses stay open. Not just now, not just in the here and now, but we continue to do this through the next 3 or 4 months during the winter period to make sure that we come out the other end and our businesses are as strong as possible doing that as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. And actually, our next story also touches on COVID testing because the Scottish Greens have urged caution after the need for PCR testing is no longer required for double vaccinated travellers arriving from non-red list countries. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said the position was taken after it became clear that the UK government lifting restrictions would have an impact in Scotland too. In her statement, the First Minister said that she had made these changes to the travel testing rules with some reluctance, adding that there remained a concern that the removal of testing requirements could hamper efforts to detect new variants. The First Minister also said that the Scottish Government is looking at additional surveillance safeguards to stop variants entering the country. The Scottish Greens health spokesperson, Gillian Mackay, said that it is concerning that the UK government seems unfazed about the spread of new variants of a virus which continues to evolve and can still cause illnesses even in people who are fully vaccinated. Ms Mackay said, the decision to open up international travel doesn't appear to be based on scientific evidence and is driven by the Tory approach to put economic growth before lives. So, Paul, do you think, first of all, do you think that this is an indication that the Westminster government doesn't care much about the risk of new variants arriving in the UK again?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen in the course of the pandemic, this has always been, how any government in the world has dealt with this. There's always been the balance between how it supports business and how it measures, the public health impact on that. And I think, on most occasions, the Scottish government's got it right. And I think in the UK, we've seen a slightly more relaxed, and that's probably been kind to the UK government approach to this. And I think, that the First Minister took a pragmatic approach to it, and she said, obviously I was in the chamber when she talked about it, that she was reluctant to do it, but I think the pragmatic approach is that people, for example, could have flew into Newcastle and then drove or came on a train, an hour up the road, and they're in Scotland. So reluctantly, it was accepted, and I think she's right looking at measures around about how we can stop other variants coming in. And we're now hopefully coming to this position that once we get through the winter time, we'll be moving out the pandemic and hopefully move it on to an endemic and things will slightly relaxed again. But we need to make sure that there's no other variants come in. If we get another variant that comes in, it's maybe immune to the vaccine. We could be back at square one again. So I think it's just being pragmatic. I can fully understand the point that Gillian was making. I think the Scottish Government had to take that approach, the pragmatic, what could possibly happen, and I think reluctantly she accepted it, but it's something we have to keep a very close eye on, I think, and again, I know there's pressure from the travel industry down south around about trying to remove all the restrictions, if you like, and again, there's that balance, but like the First Minister, I think we have to reluctantly accept it about where we are, because I don't think we're far enough out of the pandemic to be taking unnecessary risks. But we'll just have to keep an eye on it, and obviously, as I said, the Scottish Government will be bringing forward measures to make sure there's no other variants can come into Scotland. It becomes very difficult because, as you know, globally, the variants can spread very, very quickly.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. And actually, our next story is also related to coronavirus, but from a different perspective, because business premises will be able to access a £25 million package to improve ventilation and reduce the risk of coronavirus transmission. Grants will target a wide range of high-risk settings where people come into close proximity, including restaurants, bars and gyms, with support available to help companies undertake work such as the installation of carbon dioxide monitors and altering windows and vents. An expert advice group chaired by Professor Tim Sharp from the University of Strathclyde unanimously recommended that businesses should be supported to improve ventilation. The advice group was established in August to advise how enhanced ventilation can help reduce transmission of the virus. The First Minister said, as we step away from other mitigations, improved ventilation will play a significant role in reducing transmission indoors, support the sustained opening of society, and contribute to our wider recovery. So, Paul, I know that a number of licensed premises took the chance to upgrade their ventilation systems while they were closed due to COVID. So do you think in general that a greater attention to ventilation will now be paid in Scotland?
Yeah, I think it's a very sensible approach, and the First Minister's mentioned this on a number of occasions when she's come to the Chamber and spoke about this issue. And obviously, ventilation is one of the major issues that's been raised, and one of the major mitigations. And again, as I said, we move towards the colder winter months, then you're not going to have doors open and windows open as much as they were during the summer months. So I think businesses can prepare as best they possibly can in that regard. And I'm thinking about businesses in my own constituency that I know that would benefit from this. So I think that certainly helps, and it's a sensible approach. And I think the Scottish Government took the right approach. They looked at experts and had the recommendations that have come through in this, and obviously have taken it on in full. And I know there'll be many businesses, I think, that will take this up and tackle it. And I think not just in terms of this pandemic, I think as we go on, we have to make sure that we're preventing any other virus or any other, coming through at a later stage. So again, I think this will help us longer term as well. But I think it'll be very much welcomed, I think, throughout Scotland.
Thanks, Paul. I was thinking about the longer term as well, and also to speak to you with your local councillor hat on as well as an MSP. Do you think that this is going to trigger a significant shift in how we specify and operate all sorts of buildings to which groups of people have access in Scotland?
I think longer term there needs to be that broader discussion, because I certainly think a lot of the work would come down obviously to the environmental health agencies we have, and I know that the environmental health professionals in area done an amazing job, an absolutely amazing job. They spoke to businesses, advised them. There was practical solutions, pragmatic solutions when there needed to be, to make sure that they could stay open, and there were still public health safety concerns that were touched upon. Yeah, I think that businesses now will look at that, existing businesses, but new businesses, that come in. And, a lot of these premises change hands on a regular basis. I think people will be looking at that. And I think there needs to be that longer chat. I think within that, I suppose, the environmental health framework and professionals around about how we mitigate these sort of issues going forward, because we need to be vigilant. Even when we come out of this pandemic, we need to be vigilant, and I think everybody will be, and it'll play in everybody's mind for a certain period of time. So yeah, I think it will change how businesses look at how they set up and what they need to do to be as safe as possible.
Thanks, Paul. For our next story, we'll stop talking about COVID for a minute, and that's because Labour is attempting to take on the Conservative government by getting tough on law and order, with a raft of community policing policies and a clampdown on antisocial behaviour. In an evocation of Tony Blair's 1990s slogan today, the Shadow Home Secretary told Labour's annual party conference that Priti Patel's department had been soft on crime and soft on the causes of crime. Nick Thomas-Symonds said that under a Labour government, the party would launch a major recruitment drive to boost the number of special constables after unpaid officer numbers fell sharply over the last decade. He also set out a vision for a national rollout of police hubs with their own neighbourhood crime prevention teams to crack down on antisocial behaviour, and a next-generation neighbourhood watch using technology, including video doorbells and WhatsApp groups, which would be tasked with bringing people together to share information to tackle crime. The move also returns to David Blunkett's push in the early 2000s to bolster neighbourhood policing with community support officers. Labour also wants to tackle the underlying causes of addiction as part of its policy on drugs. Starmer has backed the Scottish Government's move to allow Police Scotland to issue police warnings to people caught in possession of Class A drugs rather than prosecuting them. This scheme allows police to use their discretion in cases of individual use, while those caught supplying drugs to others will still face criminal charges. Paul, Keir Starmer is now apparently channeling January 1993, but I'm not sure that I'm sensing any actual déjà vu. For a moment, for those who perhaps weren't around or weren't paying attention, January 1993 is when the oil tanker the Brer ran aground in Shetland, when the EU single market came into being, and when Bill Clinton was inaugurated as US president. So why do you think Keir Starmer's dredging around in the early 1990s? Is this just about baiting the left wing of his own party?
I think there's an element of that. I think one of the main issues behind this is that Keir Starmer is trying to reinvent himself once again. I think poll after poll after poll has shown Keir Starmer failing to establish himself, and I think this is just part of what he's trying to do. He's already looked at his internal reforms, which haven't gone down well. When you're looking round about this, and when you're trying to outflank Priti Patel on crime and Tory the Tories on crime, it smacks of desperation for myself in that regard. And I don't think it'll turn out well. And it kind of almost strikes me around about a few years ago when Labour produced these mugs around about immigration, and they were trying to almost outflank the Tories on immigration. And this kind of it smacks of this as well. And strategically, what they're trying to do, I don't know where they're trying to target. They're trying to get back, I suppose the Brexit supporting areas in the north of England, which they lost. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing the political strategy behind this. And I think ideologically, the Labour Party are all over the place on this. And I think today, when you actually see it, the crime figures were released in Scotland, and they show about a 50-year low. And I think because there's been continued investment in police numbers in Scotland, where we've seen massive cuts in police numbers in England. And we look around about, where the crime statistics are going in Scotland and in England. Just look at the police numbers. Proportionately, we have a lot more police per 1,000 in population in Scotland than we do down south. And I think and that's the reason why we see continuous drop in crime figures. But this, for me, it smacks of desperation by the Labour Party. They're leaderless. They're rudderless. They don't know what they want to do in terms of strategic, political-wise, what direction they want to go in. And it really just, as I said, it smacks of desperation in this regard. And I think, if you look back on this, Keir Starmer's had a really poor conference in terms of internal reforms. He's isolated the left of the party, and now I think you're going to see the situation that, this will impact as well. I don't think this will go down very well in these communities. when you're trying to outflank Priti Patel is a scary prospect.
Well, that's absolutely right, and you're ahead of the game here a wee bit because while crime is still an issue, as you say, we know from the recorded crime data that's just been published that crime in Scotland is at a 50-year low, and as I say, we'll talk about that in much more detail in a few minutes. But just to tease it out a bit more, why do you think the Labour Party is focusing on something that's been reducing in Scotland and to a lesser extent in England and Wales? Or are there not more straightforward ways to demonstrate that Priti Patel should not be Home Secretary than trying to out-Tory the Tories?
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think Priti Patel, when you look at some of the statements that she made, and some of the regulations she brought in. I mean, one prime example, the regulations she brought in around about immigration, her own parents would never have got across to the UK. And she didn't answer that question when she was asked on that. And I think when you look at policy development within the Labour Party, and it kind of backed up, Keir Starmer came out and released his 14,000 word essay on the future of the Labour Party just at the weekend. I had one mention in Scotland and one mention in Wales. That's how much they regard Scotland and Wales and the policy development. They say they need a strong Scotland and a strong Labour Party in Scotland and a strong Labour Party in Wales. But in terms of where they develop policies, they have no interest in what happens up here. And I think you'll see that position. The Scottish Labour Party itself doesn't bring forward many policy discussions, and if it does, it needs to be done past the Labour Party down south. So I think they're all over the place in this. I don't think when they're making policy they even think about Scotland and the implications it would have in Scotland or the rest, Wales or Northern Ireland. It just has no impact. It's not on the radar at all.
Thanks, Paul. We'll move on now to our daily update of the latest Brexit bonuses. Firstly, 4 rival unionist parties in Northern Ireland have formed an alliance to fight the Brexit protocol, issuing a joint statement weeks after the Democratic Unionist Party threatened to quit Stormont if it was not scrapped. This is seen as a significant attempt to show the DUP's hardline position is not isolated before the expected publication by the EU of fresh proposals to address the UK's latest demands to substantially rewrite the protocol which Boris Johnson signed. Meanwhile, the German freight industry has said that a plan by the British government to issue temporary visas for 5,000 foreign HGV drivers in the run-up to Christmas will not attract back drivers who left after Brexit. A post-Brexit shortage of truck drivers, exacerbated by a halt to truck driver licence testing during COVID and people leaving the haulage industry, has sown chaos through UK supply chains. The government announced a plan on Sunday to issue temporary visas for 5,000 foreign truck drivers, but Frank Huster, the chief executive of the German Freight Forwarding and Logistics Association, said that would not help. Mr. Huster said, "The new UK visa regulations, especially the temporary ones, will not change this." So, Paul, first of all, with regard to the news from the north of Ireland, is this some sort of orange washing going on? Is this a rebranding to make folks forget just how enthusiastically supportive unionist politicians in the north of Ireland were for Brexit?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were supportive of Brexit, and I think the reality, like lots of things in Brexit, has hit them front and centre in that regard. And I think it's a worrying trend. I think, to be fair, the DUP have been mentioned this for a period of time. Jeff Johnson had mentioned it, and you look at the Ulster Unionists as well. But now you've almost got I'm not saying the fringe party, but the traditional unionist vote and the popular unionist party are now joining forces in this. And of course, the DUP have talked around about collapsing the government in Northern Ireland. And that in itself, I think again adds to the list of Brexit. I'm saying unintended consequences, but we all seen what was going to happen with this. I think there's a danger, and I think the Good Friday Agreement then becomes at risk in that regard. And we've already heard Joe Biden talk about it. We've heard the potential Olaf Scholz, the potential new German Chancellor, also talk about this and saying the Good Friday Agreement is paramount in this as well. The EU have come out today and said that they're not going to renegotiate the protocol, and this was a protocol that was negotiated by the UK government, and now it's wanting to break its own protocol that it's calling, that it's not fit for purpose, but it negotiated it itself. it's a worry, and the main worry I think in this regard is that the government in the Northern Ireland falls, and it puts at risk the Good Friday Agreement, and we don't want to go back to the times of the Troubles. But that is a possibility, and I think that this is where we think we have to see the UK government take this seriously. Yeah, I think we have to see the US government, through Joe Biden and the EU being very strong in this. And I can't see any way that the EU will change the protocol. So, again, it puts the inbox in regards to Brexit for Boris Johnson, the problems just keep on rising. And again, this was a mad thought out policy that they hadn't thought through. And now we're beginning to see Brexit come home big style. And I think we're going to continue to see that come home big style.
Absolutely, Paul. And moving on to the second part of what I was just saying, as regards the reaction to the earth-shattering news that apparently 5,000 three-month visas and I think 76 qualified military tanker drivers are going to fix the shortage of 100,000 HGV drivers in the UK. And given the reaction we've seen from various parts of Europe, from Romania, from the Netherlands, and today from Germany, where do you think this is heading?
I think I've been reading reports today that some of the Olaf Scholz was asked about this as well, and didn't think that why would drivers, for example, in Europe, give up safe jobs when they've been told that they're no longer wanted just a few months ago that the UK could stand on its own 2 feet, to come across to the UK to work for three months and finish on Christmas Eve, and then go back and try and find a job. If it wasn't so serious, it's almost laughable in that regard. And I think there are other issues that need to be looked at. That this was debated and has been debated in both Westminster and Holyrood for a number of years, and it's not been taken seriously. And I was listening to a radio interview yesterday, and one of the issues I think that were mentioned by the Road Haulage Association is there are thousands upon thousands of driver applications sitting in the DVLA who aren't staffed enough to deal with these and get these people through. So I know they talked around about, UK government talked around about trying to ease the tests, but they need to invest in the infrastructure in that regard to get the road haulage industry supported in that regard. But it's all, if it wasn't so serious, it's almost laughable, the approach. It's a stick and plaster approach to this. That's not going to work, and I think we'll continue to see that. And we've seen the issue around about fuel supply, and as you said, Andrew, we've got the army coming in. But we've got the situation, that's not going to be resolved. And they've dropped competition rules in regards to that as well, UK government, in terms of that. So they've recognised the issues are here. This is longer term. And you then start looking at the other labour shortages across all sectors. And this, again, just adds to this. But, 3 or 4 days without fuel supplies and the country comes to a halt. And it could have been averted, like everything else in Brexit.
Absolutely, Paul. Oh, and I should say, and I'm not going to contradict you, but from what I've been reading today, because of the nature of the work, most of the military tanker drivers who are going to be the 76, they all come from the RAF. None of them work for the army, apparently, because they drive tankers on airfields. So it just shows the sticking plaster approach, as you say.
Yeah.
I think we'll move on to our next story now, and that is that police are investigating whether an explosive device was left in an apartment building after 4 people were seriously hurt in an explosion and fire in the Swedish city of Gothenburg. About 25 people were taken to hospital after the blast this morning set ablaze the building in a central residential area. Firefighters pulled people from the building, while others used tied sheets to lower themselves from balconies as grey smoke billowed out of stairwells and windows. 3 women and 1 man were treated for serious injuries, a university hospital spokesman said. Swedish Public Services Radio, SR, reported that about 25 people had been taken to hospitals around Sweden's second largest city. Sweden has had to contend with surging gang crime in recent years, with rival groups employing explosives and firearms to settle scores. Police, who opened an investigation, said the fire was under control and that tenants had been evacuated. Emergency services ruled out a gas leak as the cause because there is no gas piped into the building. Now, Paul, obviously our thoughts are with the people who have been injured in Gothenburg this morning, but we've touched very briefly on crime statistics for Scotland a few minutes ago, and we're going to come back to that in more detail in a minute. But in Sweden, however, after a long period with a declining trend, it seems that deadly shootings began to increase in the mid-2000s and have continued to do so. And that seems to be in contrast to most other countries in Europe where lethal violence, both in general and with firearms, has continued to decline, and that includes in Scotland. So it said that 8 out of 10 shootings took place in a criminal environment, with gang conflicts mentioned as one of the potential reasons for that trend. The drugs trade and low confidence towards the police in some parts of society were also cited as potential factors. So do you think that there are social factors underlying what's happening in Sweden? Do you think there may be a call to export some of our experience with violence reduction initiatives in the west of Scotland in order to help our colleagues and friends in Scandinavia?
Yeah, Andrew, I remember getting a briefing from this around about the violence reduction unit, and I think that's been a really strong success. And I remember speaking to the senior police in that regard, and they had police coming over from California, Los Angeles, and looking at the approach that we had over here and regarding that. And the violence reduction unit has been a fantastic initiative and has been well supported. I think when you look across, as you said, in Gothenburg in Sweden, I think that the police haven't ruled anything in or ruled anything out, and in terms of, is it gang related? I don't know. I mean, there have been issues around about, obviously, homegrown terrorism, right-wing terrorism in Scandinavia as well. So I think there's that possibility, which again, they may look at. But, and either way, I think we need to look at, the approach that Scotland's had and the success it's had. I think there needs to be these discussions, I think, with the Scandinavian countries. And I think, there already is close liaison with the countries in the Nordic region. So I think that's something that I think that the Scottish government would be open to discussion with the authorities in Sweden. But yeah, as you said, the thoughts go out to the families concerned, and if these things aren't handled, they're almost, if it is gang related, it's almost tit for tat. You'd hope that there wouldn't be something that would come after this as a revenge motive, if you like. But yeah, I think there's lessons to be learned from the policing in Scotland, particularly around about, as you said, gang related and the violence reduction unit, which has been a great success.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. And in a helpful segue, we will now come to discuss the recorded crime statistics that have been reported for Scotland today. As I say, recorded crime remains at one of the lowest levels in nearly 50 years, according to the latest annual statistics. Official figures show that the total number of crimes recorded by Police Scotland in the past year was 246,511, and that's one of the lowest levels of recorded crime since 1974. Overall, that figure is down by 5 crimes from the previous year. However, taking into account the 20,976 crimes recorded under the coronavirus-related legislation, compared to just 107 towards the end of 2019-2020, other crime categories have collectively decreased by 8% in the past year. Between 2019-2020 and 2020-21, recorded crime fell in 4 key areas. Non-sexual crimes of violence decreased by 4%, from 9,316 to 8,972, and this includes the recording of 1,641 crimes under the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018, and that's in the year 2020-21, which is the second year that legislation has been in place. Secondly, that sexual crimes decreased by 2%, from 13,364 to 13,131. Thirdly, crimes of dishonesty decreased by almost 20%, from 111,409 to 89,731. That's the lowest level since 1971. And that fire raising and vandalism decreased by 10%, from 47,731 to 42,964. And the recording of these crimes is at the lowest level since 1975. The National Statistics Recorded Crime in Scotland 2021 Bulletin, which includes a new chapter on cybercrime, estimated that 14,130 cybercrimes were recorded by the police in Scotland in that year, and that's almost double the figure from the previous year. Part of this increase may be due to significant impact of coronavirus pandemic, including behavioural changes such as much increased shopping online. The Justice Secretary, Keith Brown, said, "By all main measures, crime, including violent crime, is now considerably lower than it was a decade ago, with fewer victims." So, Paul, We touched on this briefly when we were speaking on the Full Scottish on Sunday, but sexual crimes reduced by only 2%, which in a way sounds to me like it is almost within the margin of error. What do you think we need to do to make sexual crimes drop in Scotland in the same way as we've seen other crimes drop?
Yeah, I think there still needs to be a continued focus. And just yesterday, I had met with Zero Tolerance, and they're a group that it looks at violence against women. And we had a chat through around about some of the issues that needs to be there. And a lot of it is obviously around about gender equality, how society views women, and as a zero tolerance approach, I think we need to do that. Men need to speak out against this. Men need to speak out against men behaving the way they do. And I think that's one of the key things that we need to be looking at is, that more men need to be coming out and saying that. As soon as we talk about violence against women, you tend to see that it's women politicians that come out and say men need to talk about this and condemn men's behaviour. I've seen it. I think we've mentioned on the show on Sunday that I've got a daughter and my wife as well, and they've both, had to deal with inappropriate touch and inappropriate comments and so on. That's not acceptable, and I think if that's allowed to go on and that thing is allowed to go on, then some men take it far too far, and you see the cases. We've seen Sabina Nessa, Sarah Everard, where it results in and their death, and if we need to tackle it, it's a cultural issue, but we need to make sure that there's legislation to back that up as well. I know that is through gender equality. I think Scotland's made a positive steps in that, but we need to make sure that we continue on that. And I think the other thing as well is that we need to make sure that there's an environment as safe as possible where women report sexual crime and feel in a position that they feel safe in reporting it and the environment is safe and to do that. And I think we need to listen to women more around about that. Again, I think things have improved in the last number of years, but we need to make sure that women feel safe about reporting crimes of a sexual activity. And we continue to see more, I suppose, more convictions in that. So there's a lot more work to be done. I think we're going in the right way. But one of the key things I said is we need to change culture, and men need to speak out against this a lot more than we currently do, and continue to do that on a consistent basis right across society, across political chambers as well. We need to make sure that continues to change culturally and be backed up, as I said, with legislation.
That's a very good point, Paul. I think we're going to, from the conversations and the discussions we've heard over the last few months, we've heard Police Scotland talk about the need for societal change and cultural change, not only in respect of sex crimes, also in respect of other hate crimes. And so I think I'm pretty sure we'll be returning to discuss this topic and discuss the interaction between Police Scotland and the work they do and more deep-rooted societal change. I'm sure we're going to come back to that. However, one other thing struck me about these numbers quickly. Fire rising and vandalism are down 10% now to the lowest level since 1975. Now, whilst the reasons behind those two separate crimes may very well be different, does this drop perhaps pull the rug from the usual right-wing complaints that society is in terminal decline because there's no national service anymore?
I think it partly does. I think we have to be. I welcome the drop. I think we have to be cautious because I think in the briefing I had with my own local area commander, obviously there was a period of time where there was obviously lockdown where there wasn't a lot of people that were out, and I think we have to be. I still think we would have seen a drop, and the local police commander indicated that they would still thought they would have seen that. But I think there's some caution I think to seen in that regard because for a period of time people weren't out. But I think then we've probably seen in terms of cyber-related crime. There's a lot more scams going on. There's a lot more. So I think there's that balance around about people maybe can sit and operate in criminal activity from home, and we've kind of seen the rise in the cyber activity and cyber crime. And I think we have to be cautious. And I think both of these will probably balance out next year. I think now we've kind of come out with the restrictions. Most of the restrictions have been lifted. I think you'll probably see a balance. I still think that the direction in terms of travel in regards to honesty and so on will continue down because there is that focus on it and we're maintaining the police numbers. In terms of cyber activity, I think that's going to be an issue that we're going to have to continue to invest in. And as soon as you try and mitigate that, these people will come in and try to look at design schemes again that do that. So I think that's just going to be part of policing in the next number of years. And I think we've seen even like SEPA, we've had to deal with a major cyber attack, and that really impacted on their operations. So I think we're going to need to look about how we tackle that issue. But that's not just in Scotland. That's the rest of the world that has to deal with that, and it's going to be an ongoing issue.
Absolutely right. And Paul, now our final story is that it also has a crime aspect to it. A river that runs through the Glastonbury Festival site, that's the largest greenfield music festival in the world, has been contaminated with illicit drugs such as cocaine and ecstasy because stoned revellers often urinate on the ground, scientists have said. Researchers from Bangor University found that concentrations of MDMA, known as ecstasy, quadrupled downstream in the White Lake River in the week after the Glastonbury Festival when it was last held in 2019. Cocaine concentrations rose to levels that would affect the life cycle of European eels, a protected species, the researchers said. Illicit drug contamination from public urination happens at every music festival, said Dan Aberg, a master's student in the School of Natural Sciences at Bangor. Glastonbury's festival close proximity to a river results in any drugs released by festival attendees having little time to degrade in the soil before entering the fragile freshwater ecosystem, Aberg said. A spokesman for the festival has said that protecting local streams and wildlife is of paramount importance to Glastonbury. So, Paul, despite what this student from Bangor University said about every music festival, this doesn't sound much to me like the Dunbar Music Festival from earlier this month, or the sort of thing that you would find in the Tyne as it flows through Haddington in the summer. But there's maybe a serious point.
Yeah, I think you're right, Andrew. I mean, these festivals have been going on for a long number of years. Right back from Woodstock and so on, and the emergency, the flower power and so on. And I think I think when you look back at that these festivals are you're attracting a large number of people. I think there's responsibility in organisers to make sure that people are safe. I don't think they're ever going to stop people taking substances at these events. I think by the very numbers of people that are attending, I think the key thing is getting a balance in terms of to make sure that there's enough medical support that's there, and there has to be that consideration as well as about how it impacts on the environment. And because you're talking about large areas of the countryside that's been looked at, so there's always that balance, and I think you're right. I think there's maybe more a chance of it in Dunbar, if it's Dunbar Traditional Music Festival, about maybe some fish suppers being dropped rather than anything else in that regard. There's always that balance and seriousness in regards to policing these and making sure that. And I think over a number of years, the policing has stewarding and the policing has been much better at these events to try and get a balance, not them run as freely as possible, if you like, but without putting public health at risk, and that's the main concern. I think before the number of deaths you're seeing at these now, thankfully, are quite rare. But there's always that balance to be held, and I think that's always consideration when any local authority would license an event such as that size. Glastonbury, attracts thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people over a period of time. So,
of course.
But yeah, I don't think down in the Dunbar Traditional Music Festival, as I said, for a long number of years. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Paul. And that was our final news item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, and we would like you to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. I'd like to say thank you to Paul McLennan MSP for joining us from Dunbar this evening. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Andrew.
And thank you too for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland this evening. That's very much the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening.